No one paid attention to the little color flash photo studio at the end of Fairhope's main street anymore, a quiet town on the edge of Mobile Bay, where time moved as slowly as the gentle waves of Alabama. The studio had been closed since 2015, but during an inventory check of the old storage room early this spring, an undeveloped roll of film was discovered inside a rusted drawer alongside an old analog camera, an Olympus stylus Epic. The newly hired photo technician, a first-year art student named Lonnie, curiously decided to develop the film. He did not think much of it. He simply wanted to test his skills and perhaps produce a few black-and-white artsy photos for Instagram. But the first image that appeared once it dried made him freeze in place for nearly 5 minutes. The photo showed 3 young people sitting around a campfire, deep in a shadowy forest. The firelight cast a golden glow on their faces. A girl smiled brightly, flanked by 2 boys, one raising a brown paper cup in a toast, the other turning his head to look behind, toward the dark, unfocused background of the woods. What made Lonnie's spine go cold was not the 3 of them, but the faint, shadowy figure standing just a few meters behind, beyond the trees, slightly to the right. The face was unclear, but the figure was tall, motionless, as if watching them from a distance. When Lonnie zoomed in using photo editing software, he noticed the picture had been taken with a timer, from the ground. And it was part of the only roll of film left. The rest of the roll contained shots of the forest, a pair of muddy shoes, and a torn map. Lonnie uploaded the photo to a forum for vintage film cameras to ask if anyone could identify the era or camera model. But within 18 hours, he received a private message from a nameless account. Stop posting. They didn't come back. In just 3 days. The trail led back to an unsolved disappearance more than 10 years ago, a case that had once shocked all of Alabama for a short time. Before fading into obscurity, 3 senior students from the University of South Alabama vanished during a camping trip in Conecuh National Forest. In the spring of 2009, no trace left behind, no phones, no car, and no one had ever found that camera. 3 names, once thought forgotten, were now spoken again after 14 years. Imani DeCosta, an environmental science major, the only child of a Ghanaian immigrant mother, who kept her daughter's photo in her wallet for nearly 2 decades. Rhodes Mercer, an anthropology student, whose thesis focused on isolated communities in the Appalachians. And Callum Price, a journalism major, known for his sharp pieces on small towns disappearing from the map of America. All 3 had set out on the weekend of the Spring Festival. In March of 2009, saying they were going research camping for a class project. They chose Conecuh National Forest, about a 2.5-hour drive northeast of Fairhope, a sparse forest, with red soil, a diverse ecosystem, and nearly no cell signal. Callum's 1998 Toyota Corolla was last seen at a trailhead near the forest edge, unlocked, with 3 backpacks in the back seat, but no one saw them leave. No one saw them return. Only one thing was certain: no survivor was ever found. And now, a single photo developed after 14 years brought the case back into the light. The blurry figure in the background, taller than the tree line, unmoving, raised countless questions. But what led the police to reopen the case file was not just that shadow. It was a small detail in the lower corner of the image. A tiny scrap of paper, edges scorched by ash, lay near Imani's feet, where the firelight reflected handwritten words. Not coming back. Maybe that's for the best. No one could confirm who wrote it, or when. But the photo, clearly, was taken before they disappeared. That photograph is now stored in the reopened case file, coded Conecuh-09-reinvestigation, alongside the Olympus camera and the partially developed film roll, and the disappearance once buried in the past is now forcing the town of Fairhope to confront it once more. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel to follow the trail of forgotten disappearances, because some names were never called again. Imani DeCosta often wrote in reddish-brown ink, not because she wanted to stand out, but because it was the cheapest ink available at the stationery store near the dormitory of the University of South Alabama. In her locker, 4 notebooks were once found, each one hand-drawn with maps of micro-ecosystems, annotated meticulously on every page, sometimes accompanied by lines of icon quotations. the language her mother used to whisper when lulling her to sleep as a child. Imani was a senior majoring in environmental science. She had received a full scholarship, the only student in her high school class in Mobile to be accepted straight into university without taking the SAT, independent, serious, quiet, yet strangely magnetic. She made people feel they ought to be silent just to hear her speak, even if only a sentence, in her final visit to her thesis advisor's office. Imani left behind a drawing of root systems in the tropical forest, which she intended to compare with the vegetation in Conecuh Forest. She had annotated it in brown ink. Want to compare adaptation? Do trees here retain water like in Ghana? Rhodes Mercer, Ro, was once a kid who played the banjo at Mobile's flea market. Curly hair, brown eyes, and a pair of canvas shoes always dusty. He chose anthropology because he was obsessed with things that were disappearing, languages, rituals, abandoned towns. Ro's thesis was titled Traces of Survival, How Memory Persists Without Writing, an unusual topic, but one his advisor considered to have rare depth. In his last email to a classmate, he attached photos of crude drawings on cliff walls in the Appalachian Mountains and wrote, "If we vanish, who will read our traces?" Ro was the one who suggested the camping trip to Conecuh Forest. He wanted to live 72 hours like a tribe once did. No phones, no GPS devices, only paper maps and a compass. Callum Price was the only one in the group who had ever published an article in a local magazine, as a journalism student. Callum sought out fringe stories about the homeless at gas stations, the only barbershop left in a black neighborhood, or the lives of people in towns that no longer had a post office. Callum once told his ex-girlfriend that he feared a day when people would live without telling stories, with his Olympus stylus epic camera. Callum captured everyday moments, a pair of muddy feet, a cat sleeping in a shopping cart, a pair of hands clasped together, unsure if in prayer or exhaustion, on his dorm desk. A photo was found taped with glue paper, him and Ro laughing under the rain, both raising water bottles in the air, while Imani, cloaked in a jacket, looked into the camera, half smiling. The day they left. No one noticed. It was Friday, March 20th, 2009, right during spring break. None of them brought a phone. They left a handwritten note for their roommates. "We're going for 3 days, back by Sunday. If we're late, call Professor Harper." Imani brought a sketchbook, a compass, and a pouch of dried seeds. Ro carried a canvas bag with maps, a multi-tool, and a small book on Lakota tribal rituals. Callum brought the camera, 2 rolls of Kodak film, and a metal water bottle engraved with his mother's name. The Corolla was parked neatly beside a trailhead leading into the forest. No one saw them walk in. No one knew exactly where they planned to camp. Ro once said he wanted to find a place that wasn't on any map, and all 3 agreed. The police later found Callum's backpack 3 days afterward, its bottom slashed. Lying about 500 meters from the car, inside were a shirt, a pack of matches soaked through, and a notebook sealed tightly with duct tape, authorship unknown. The book was sent for analysis but has yet to be fully deciphered. Each page was written in 2 types of ink, black and brown. Some lines were marked with notes such as, "Don't trust anyone after sunset," "Mark the 4th tree, westward," "Don't open if you hear knocking." No one could determine whether those notes were warnings, reminders, or just inside jokes. But everything, from the handwriting to their belongings and personalities, pointed to one truth. They were intelligent, cautious, and idealistic students. There was no reason for them to vanish voluntarily, no signs of conflict. None of the 3 had debts or a criminal record, and none had ever shown any sign of wanting to escape their lives. 14 years later, when that photo surfaced, the only clear fact was that each of them had been vibrantly alive before that campfire. Imani, bending down to light the fire with a red Zippo lighter. Ro, standing behind, holding a tree branch, as if performing a ritual. Callum, seated further back, likely the one who had placed the camera on a rock before setting the timer, and behind them, the 4th figure, nameless. Imani's mother, Mrs. Imani DeCosta, still lived in the 2nd-floor apartment at the Roosevelt complex, where a small Ghanaian flag had hung from the balcony for many years. She had never changed the door lock, despite neighbors urging her to do so. Imani could come back any time. She knows the lock code. I don't want to change anything that might make her have to knock. Once a month. She still sent emails to her daughter's address, a habit no one quite understood, as the inbox had been inactive since 2011. But she wrote as though Imani were still reading. This week the weather is warm. I bought lentils, the kind you like, if you come home. I'll make soup cocoa. On the small altar by the window, she kept a single photograph, Imani standing in a forest, holding a leafy branch above her head, her lips pressed into a faint smile. The photo was taken with a film camera sent by Callum after their sophomore field trip. Callum's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Price, had moved away from Fairhope in 2015, but they returned every March. They didn't call it a death anniversary, only a day of return. They went to the same parking spot by Conecuh Forest, bringing 3 folding chairs, a thermos of tea, and an old leather-bound notebook. Inside the notebook were handwritten notes, messages for Callum, Imani, and Ro. No one else was allowed to read those words. After each visit, they tore out a page, burned it with a lighter, and scattered the ashes into the wind. One of Callum's old friends recalled, "Mr. Price once told me, we're not waiting for news, we're keeping the fire." As for Ro, his parents had passed away when he was in middle school. The only person he kept regular contact with was his aunt, Estelle, who lived in Decatur, after the disappearance. Aunt Estelle had submitted a request to reopen the investigation twice, but both were denied due to lack of new evidence in 2014. Aunt Estelle submitted a third request, this time including a cassette tape. It was a birthday recording from Ro. He sang an old folk tune, the gentle sound of his banjo weaving through the hum of passing cars on the street outside. His voice is still there, still whole. It couldn't just dissolve into the forest like that, Aunt Estelle once said in a local radio interview. Friends of the 3 once held a memorial 2 years after the incident. They lit candles in the backyard of the old dormitory, where the trio had once played music and eaten instant noodles together. One student read aloud the final lines of Ro's thesis, found in an email sent to his professor. "If one day my traces disappear, I hope people remember that I tried to understand, not just with my eyes, but with faith." For the first 10 years, the case remained an occasional topic in media, anthropology, and ecology classes at the University of South Alabama. A few freshman students would visit the old campsite as a kind of ritual of remembrance. But gradually, their names faded, replaced by newer cases, hotter news, more images. No one mentioned the camera anymore. No new leads were found. And Conecuh Forest stood as it always had, green, sparse, and silent. Not until the year 2023, when Lonnie posted the developed photo from the old film roll, did everything seem to resurface. Within 3 days, police received more than 70 calls from Fairhope residents. Many claimed they had once seen strange firelight in the woods, or heard the sound of a car horn at night with no clear source. A convenience store clerk said, "I once saw a young man near the gas station around 2 in the morning, wearing a torn coat, long hair, barefoot. He didn't say a word. When I asked what he needed, he just raised his hand, as if asking for water." Though the accounts were vague, the community seemed to awaken. A biology teacher organized a discussion titled "Ecological Hypotheses on the Disappearance of the 3 Students." A group of high schoolers launched a podcast to document every detail of the case. They reread the old files, repeated each name, traced the map, even reconstructed the journey that might have taken place. And throughout that year, for the first time in over a decade, candles once again appeared in the windows of the old dormitory, one for each person, on the morning of Friday, March 20th, 2009. The weather in Fairhope was overcast, with a light breeze. In the mailbox outside the C2 dormitory, there was a folded note, handwritten in brown ink. 3 days, back by Sunday, IRC. Callum's silver-gray Corolla left the university campus at 8:40 in the morning. According to footage from the main gate camera, there were 3 people in the car. On the back seat were 3 large backpacks and a canvas bag holding folded paper maps. Callum was driving, Rose sat in the front passenger seat. Imani was in the back, head bowed over her notebook. They stopped at a small roadside gas station near Bruton at 10:17. Security footage showed Callum paying in cash for water, matches, and an energy bar. Meanwhile, Rowe was talking to an older man filling his tank at the next pump, but the audio was not recorded. That man, Mr. Wallace Denton, later said in his statement, "He asked me if I knew any parts of the forest where few people went. I told him the southern dry lake area, but those roads are old, easy to get lost." They arrived at the southwest parking lot of Conecuh Forest at 11:50. Their car's location was captured in a photo taken by a family on a picnic, the license plate of the Corolla visible in the background of their souvenir shot. Police discovered the photo several weeks after the disappearance was reported. This was the last officially documented trace, after 4 days with no contact, on March 24th. Callum's roommate informed Professor Harper. Police were deployed 36 hours later. The Corolla was found exactly where it had been parked. The doors were unlocked. Callum's backpack was found 500 meters to the south, the bottom slashed open. Inside were a shirt, a pack of soaked matches, and a strange notebook written in both black and brown ink. But the footprints around it had been washed away by rain. No identification documents, no signs of struggle. The extended search lasted 10 days. Over 80 people participated, including professional rescue teams, search dogs, and local volunteers. They split into small groups, combing trails, dry creeks, and clearings in the forest. No trace was found. On the 7th day, a rescue team discovered a small mound of disturbed earth, believed at first to be an animal burrow. But when they dug, they uncovered a fragment of a scarf, purple, the same color Imani was often seen wearing in school photos. However, DNA testing could not confirm the identity due to decay and contamination with soil nearby. A faint mark was found on the trunk of a tree, 3 horizontal lines, 1 diagonal slash like a sign or symbol. No one could confirm whether it had been made by the students. Another detail in Callum's notebook puzzled investigators. Amid the chaotic lines was a passage heavily crossed out but still legible. "Don't let it hear running water. Stay silent after dawn." It was written in brown ink. The handwriting matched Imani's. The next line. In black ink, Rose handwriting. "If you reach the lake, turn back. That's where it all began." At the time, police believed the lake was metaphorical, but years later, when the case resurfaced, a former forest ranger named Darrell Chambers remembered, "There used to be an old lake. It's dry now, originally used for firefighting water storage. It's not on public maps because the area was restricted since 1993. A search team was sent to the dry lake. They found several old traces, a broken tent frame, blackened fire marks, and a stainless steel spoon engraved with R. Mercer, beneath a layer of soil mixed with ash. They also discovered a roll of Kodak 400 film. The film canister was slightly sticking out of the ground, possibly stepped on or left behind long ago. The roll had been stored in the evidence room for 14 years. No one had thought to develop it, not until 2023. When the other film roll surfaced at the Fairhope photo studio, did they revisit the old evidence? When developed? The final photo came out clearly, a campfire, identical to the one Lonnie had posted. But the angle was different, shot from behind Callum, which meant there had been at least 2 cameras. A man named Glenn Harrow, after seeing the photo online, contacted the police. He recounted that in 2009, while working at a climate research station near Conecuh, he had heard laughter and music echoing from the forest in late March. He assumed it was a camping group and paid no attention. But the next morning, while inspecting the forest edge, he came across a shattered camera casing and a streak of dried color, possibly blood, on a tree branch. At the time, he assumed it was from an animal, but upon closely examining the photo, he recognized the Olympus Stylus Epic, the exact model he'd seen that day. The detail matched further when police confirmed that the camera in Callum's possession had a faint crack on its top right corner, a crack never accounted for when it was collected. This raised the question, if Callum had the camera, then who took the photo from behind him? When the original case file was reopened in 2023, a chilling realization soon emerged. Far too many small links had been overlooked during the initial search, not due to negligence, but because, at the time, the disappearance of the 3 students had been classified as a self-imposed risk based on their own decisions, not bringing phones, failing to provide a detailed itinerary, and choosing a remote area with little access. The 2009 investigation team never followed up on the conversation between Rowe and Mr. Wallace Denton at the gas station, simply because they hadn't known it had taken place. Only when the gas station camera photo was re-examined did police track down Mr. Wallace, who by then had moved to Florida. He confirmed that Rowe had asked for directions to the southern Dry Lake area, information the original search team had been completely unaware of. The Dry Lake area, where the broken tent frame and the spoon engraved with Rowe's name were later found, had never been included in the 2009 search plan. Another missed detail was the ink marks in Callum's notebook. At the time, investigators focused on the message content, but never conducted chemical tests on the different types of ink. By 2023, with new spectrographic analysis equipment, an anomaly was detected. At least 3 distinct types of ink were used in the notebook. Besides Imani's brown ink and Rowe's black ink, there was a third type, blue-gray ink, appearing only once in a faint, almost faded line. Do not let them split up. If they do, return to the starting point. The handwriting did not match any of the 3 students. The notebook had been flipped through several times, but no one had noticed that page 11 bore a faint imprint, like a shoe print, reversed, with 6 deep treads. When compared to the shoe models the students were known to wear, none matched. However, the 6-tread pattern was distinctive to a specialized trekking boot, produced in limited quantities and distributed mainly to forestry staff and park rangers. This discovery led the investigation team to revisit a report that had once been excluded from the 2009 case file. In that report, written by an intern from the Alabama Forestry Department, there was a passage that read, "At the southern edge of Conecuh, around noon on March 21st, a man wearing a long khaki coat and a wide-brimmed hat was seen standing motionless near the entrance of trail number 12. When asked if he needed help, the man did not respond. He simply turned his head and walked into the forest." At the time, this note was marked as unrelated, but when compared with the students' estimated entry timeline, noon on March 21st falls right at the midpoint of their planned 3-day journey, and the location of trail number 12 was less than 2 kilometers from the Dry Lake area. Physical evidence had also been mishandled. The Olympus Stylus Epic camera, the only item recovered in 2023, was originally assumed to belong to Callum, but upon reviewing his student press property records, an anomaly surfaced. The camera Callum had registered was an Olympus Stylus 120, not the Epic. So whose camera was the Epic? The one that developed the photo with the 4th figure? A theory emerged. Perhaps the camera in the photo was the second device, and the Stylus 120 that Callum carried was the one smashed near the climate station Glenn Harrow had described. If true, then the person holding the other camera wasn't Callum, but someone else in the group, or someone entirely different. The next contradiction came from an audio clue. A cassette tape had been submitted in 2014 by Estelle, Rowe's aunt, as part of her petition to reopen the case. At the time, police gave it a cursory listen, identifying Rowe's voice singing a folk tune, with nothing seemingly unusual. The tape was stored as a memento, never analyzed further. In 2023, a volunteer audio engineer reviewed the entire tape. In the final 3 seconds, just after the banjo went silent, there was a strange sound, resembling a knock on wood, followed by a sharp, panicked breath. No one could say where the sound had been recorded, but the engineer determined it was not a natural echo. It was regular and forceful, like a hand pounding on a wooden wall, which eerily echoed the note found in the journal. "Don't open if you hear knocking." Whoa, taken together. These scattered details, once thought unrelated, began to form a web of clear contradictions. They had planned for 3 days, but brought 4 rolls of film, 2 different types of cameras, and nearly double the expected provisions. There were 2 cameras, but only one was found. The other, the model officially registered, has never surfaced. There was at least 1 shoe print that did not match the group. featuring a rare sole pattern from a limited edition trekking boot used mainly by forestry personnel. A stranger had been seen in the forest during the exact time frame of their disappearance, and there existed a cassette tape, thought to be a simple birthday greeting, that captured a final sound no one can confidently explain. If all of this was mere coincidence, then Fairhope is a town that defies logic. When everything was pieced together, evidence, traces, witness accounts, scattered sounds and images, only one explanation remained that could reasonably account for what happened during those 3 days in the Conecuh Forest. The trip began as a plan for natural exploration, but somewhere between the first and second day, something changed. The notes in the journal, from warnings to instructions to return to the lake, suggest the 3 students were no longer merely surveying or camping. They may have discovered something unusual. The dry lake, once used for firefighting, removed from maps since 1993, might have been the center of those changes if they set up camp there. The found traces of activity, the stainless steel spoon, even the shallowly buried roll of film, indicate they stayed at least one night. The photo capturing all 3 around the campfire, with the figure in the background, may have been taken right at that lake before anything went wrong. But what changed the next day that made them so cautious? Perhaps it was the man seen near trail number 12, less than 2 kilometers from the lake, the one who didn't speak, only turned away and walked into the forest. If he were a ranger, why refuse contact? If not, then who was he and what was he doing in a restricted zone? The boot print with deep treads, matching specialized gear, further supports the suspicion that someone else had accessed that area at the same time the students were still alive. The first theory, also the one previously dismissed, suggests that the 3 students encountered a stranger in the forest, not a serial killer, not a supernatural force, just someone who didn't want to be found, perhaps a recluse, someone in hiding, or simply a person with a past they needed to keep secret. If the students had stumbled upon this person's shelter, possibly an old wooden hut, or an abandoned research station, then what happened next would no longer be a matter of theory. But there was a second possibility, one that few had considered. This theory stemmed from the very notes found in the journal. Do not let them split up. If they do, return to the starting point. Don't let it hear running water. Stay silent after dawn. And the single line written in unidentified handwriting. Don't open if you hear knocking. These didn't read like instructions. They read like warnings, repeated again and again, as if to be remembered, or to remind each other. The theory suggests the students may have discovered something themselves, a ritual, an event, or a local phenomenon they did not fully understand. They tried to document it, to study it, to replicate it, but went too far. If so, then the incident did not come from an outsider, but from within. Someone in the group may have started to lose their bearings, or become unstable. The tension showed in the use of different inks, possibly a sign of distrust. Perhaps one of them decided to separate, and never came back. That might also explain the second photo, taken from behind Callum. It wasn't a timer set by Callum, but a shot taken secretly by the remaining person. To observe, to preserve. The Olympus Stylus Epic camera, the one that didn't match the registered model, was the final missing piece. If Callum had carried the Stylus 120, and it was the one shattered near the climate station as Glenn Harrow claimed, then the Epic could have belonged to someone else. Maybe Roe or Imani had picked it up at a flea market, but it could also have, though no one wanted to consider this, belonged to a fourth person. The photo with the figure in the background wasn't accidentally captured. It was a message, or a warning. There is no way to know exactly what happened after that last night around the campfire, but many signs point to this. The 3 of them did not leave the forest together. One of them may have walked away, perhaps in fear, or from injury, or due to internal conflict. One may have returned to the starting point, as the journal said, and one, perhaps, developed the film and hid it, as a way to preserve the truth. It's possible the camera was deliberately buried with the film, so that if someone found it, they might understand what had once happened. In 2024, the photograph of the 3 around the fire was enlarged and displayed at the symposium Expanded Memory, Art from an Unresolved Disappearance at the University of South Alabama. During the panel, a first-year student asked, if they never came back, then who was the last person to hold the camera? Professor Harper, who had once advised all three students, gave a single reply. The one who wanted to speak but couldn't. At the Fairhope Police Department evidence room, the Olympus Epic camera was kept in a humidity-controlled box. Beside the developed roll of Kodak film, the final photo bearing a faint scratch in the upper right corner. It was unclear whether the flaw came from film processing or the reflection of firelight. But when the lower part of the image was closely examined, near Callum's feet, a metal water bottle could be seen, lying on its side, gleaming silver. It was engraved with Imani Price. Callum's mother confirmed it was the bottle she had given her son when he was 12 years old. A small gift, which had stayed with him until the end. And in a small photo studio, where the entire story began again, that photo still remains in a wooden frame, taped with a strip of white paper bearing the words, "No one returned, but they were here." If you believe this story has value, please like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel because there are still many disappearances that have never been told.